principle is at work. Just as the same principle was at work in order to explain why all of mankind can engage in peaceful cooperation based on division of labor. Why there is not only a reason for division of labor for the Germans, but the Germans and the French against each other must fight. Why the same principle applies to Germans and to French. So we have to recognize that this statist principle, if it should be correct, should also apply to the level of you and me. That is to say, either I am your slave or you must be my slave, but it is impossible that peaceful cooperation between two of us can exist. And once you recognize that the same principle that applies not just to two people, but applies to the entire world, you recognize immediately, of course, that this is just a made-up myth, created, so to speak, by this initial crisis that the states themselves, or the would-be states, created in order to blind people to something that should be perfectly obvious. So now, once a state has established this sort of mythology, they all go through a sequence of steps, again, essentially the same sequence of steps wherever you look. The first one is, of course, you have to disarm the population. There existed initially in the Middle Ages, of course, independent army leaders offering their army services to whoever needed them, mercenary troops. They are now incorporated into the national army or into the king's army, or they are eliminated. Again, all states try to disarm the population. In the Middle Ages, one of the immediate things that kings, as soon as they had acquired semi-state position, was to insist that all the nobles had to raise down their own fortresses to prevent, so to speak, that they might come up with the idea that maybe that whole thing was a screwy process after all, and they would defend themselves against the jurisdiction or the tax impositions coming from the side of the king. So raise your fortresses. Now you can build nice palaces, so to speak, but no longer anything that serves defensive purposes. Then, of course, all independent jurisdictions must be eliminated. Ultimately, even going as far as no longer allowing, the husbands and wives, so to speak, to be judge in their own house. This process takes hundreds of years. You see, my reconstruction compresses this, of course, into a very short period of time. But all of these powers are gradually, step by step, won from civil society, and we have basically only now, in the 20th century, reached the point where where the power of the state extends as far as involving itself in immediate family affairs, like daring, for instance, to take the kids away from parents. This is something that would not have been possible, of course, hundreds of years ago. The power of the kings was not sufficient from the outset to do something like this, but we now realize, of course, now the power of the state is large enough in order to tell you whether you can smoke in your own room or not. The next step is very importantly, of course, to control the ideology, to keep this belief in the Hobbesian myth and the necessity of the state for the creation of peace alive. And for this, you have to take over, will try to take over first the churches. This occurs basically with the Protestant Revolution, as a result of which a far closer alliance between church and state is built than existed prior to the Protestant revolutions. By the way, that's why the Protestant revolutions, of course, were supported by so many princes, because they realized that was exactly offering them the opportunity to establish themselves as states. Besides the motive, of course, that they could also grab the property of the Catholic Church, which in some countries made up 20 to 30% of the used land mass. So it offered them a great opportunity to just enrich themselves greatly by expropriating the churches, and then, of course, introducing successively public education, either controlling the church, which the church was the main instructional institutions for a long period of time, making the priests state employees. This has, of course, happened in all European countries to a larger or smaller extent. In particular, of course, in the Protestant countries, where all priests are paid according to just the official pay scale that other bureaucrats are paid. And if this does not go far enough, then, of course, create a system of public education under direct state control. Again, Martin Luther, for instance, played a great role in this thing, advising the princes not only to oppress the peasants, who he had first, so to speak, brought to rise against the princes, but then smashed them down, who advised the princes that just as the people should be trained in order to be ready for war, so, of course, they should be also brainwashed in state-controlled schools in order to be brave and well-trained citizens. And in the last step, after the nationalization of education, or the two last steps are the control of money, that is, the monopolization of the issue of money. There existed, for instance, in France, before the establishment of central French king, a multitude of mints competing against each other, trying to acquire, so to speak, the reputation of producing the best, most reliable, least manipulated with type of money. All these competing mints were gradually closed down until in the end only one central government mint remained in existence, which of course makes it far easier to engage in manipulations of the gold or silver content than it would be if there would be a multitude of mints competing against each other. If you have a multitude of mints competing against each other, each mint has, so to speak, an incentive to point out if another one is defrauding you. Just now here, these guys here, mint from town A or town B, they are engaging in coin